talk about the July agreement on the lockouts. On July 31st, 2024, the mayor and yourself announced that the city had secured agreements with Uber and Lyft to drastically reduce lockouts. What specific commitments were made by Uber and Lyft in regards to reducing lockouts, and how will these commitments be tracked?
So it was a three-prong approach. What we wanted to do, council member, was to ensure that we had an effort that provided relief for drivers immediately. A standard rulemaking process could take months, oftentimes more than several months. And so we wanted to make sure that we could provide relief for those drivers who were impacted by the lockouts immediately. One, it would end lockouts, which it has and continues to do, require Lyft to have a minimum utilization on an annualized basis of 50%. And the other part was that they would not onboard any new drivers and ensure that current drivers are busy before onboarding new drivers.
Thank you. And I'd also like to recognize Gotham Professional Arts Academy from Councilmember Crystal Hudson's district, who's joined us today. Welcome. We hope you enjoy yourself at City Hall. Were any of the agreements that were made or commitments memorialized in any formal documents?
Yes, there was a formal document from Lyft dated in July to provide their assurance that they would reach 50% on an annualized basis.
Can you share those documents with the committee?
We can.
Thank you. Are there any penalties or consequences if Uber or Lyft do not meet their commitments?
Yeah, so one of the ways that we're looking at this is that we're working with our stakeholders, including our advocates, to ensure that we have the correct rulemaking process in place. And we're going to take on a rulemaking process despite this deal, right? What I wanted to do was ensure that we work with Uber, Lyft, and many of the drivers, because what I've heard from hundreds of drivers is that they wanted immediate relief from this. And what we were able to achieve was immediate relief for our drivers. But that doesn't preclude us from issuing new rules, and we're working on them as we speak.
Thank you for that. Now, how long has Uber and Lyft agreed to pause onboarding new drivers? And when would it be appropriate for Uber and Lyft to begin onboarding new drivers again? Is there a utilization rate threshold you have an eye on at all?
As part of the agreement, they cannot onboard, but it is indefinite. And we want to look at memorializing some of the things within the agreement permanently, like not onboarding new drivers until there's a certain utilization rate. Again, this is all deliberative, council member, and we haven't finalized where we are yet. But one of the main aspects of this is to resolve the lockout issue in perpetuity.
Now, Uber's commitment to reducing lockouts is contingent on Lyft reaching a 50% utilization rate. If Lyft does not reach that rate, is there anything preventing Uber from reinstating their policy on lockouts?
Yeah, like I said, that we're working on rules to make permanent some parts of those agreements, but also additional rules to ensure that we protect driver pay and then also ensure that hopefully in the future that loopholes like the ones that they have taken advantage of are closed.
And I know you said the rules are still being worked out, but will there be any changes to next year's utilization rate calculation to offset the impact of Uber and Lyft's lockout policy from the first half of this year?
We're looking at ways where the new rules may address that.
While the agreement with Uber and Lyft is a step in the right direction, it's ultimately a short-term solution to the larger problem of driver lockouts. What specific long-term solution is TLC and the administration working towards to eliminate driver lockouts? And when the agreement was announced, you stated that there was a robust rule package designed to disincentivize access restrictions. Can you describe what those rules would do and when the rulemaking process will actually begin?
Yeah, I know that there have been a lot of pain for drivers during the couple of months that there were lockouts. And so that is why we are not only working with our advocates to looking at what they have put in front of us, but our own rules to ensure that lockouts hopefully are a thing of the past. What we're looking at is one, continuing onboarding restrictions, providing flexibility for drivers, and ending overall lockouts. This is something that I know is incredibly important to many of our drivers, but there is a very delicate balance in terms of the utilization rates that we need to be aware of, because that utilization rate increases driver pay. And so we're looking at that aspect as part of the solution as well. But our advocates have come up with real, meaningful solutions that I am examining, diving deep, and ensuring that we look at it deeply so that we can have the best rule package available. We hope that we can get the rule package out by the end of this year.
Thank you. I want to pivot to Green Rides, EV for hire vehicle applications. How many new licenses were given out last year when the EV for hire vehicle applications were open?
There were about 9,700 applications. We gave out about 8,700, and 93% of those went to individual drivers.
What's the percentage?
93% went to individual drivers.
Have all applications been processed?
We were very proud, and I thank our TLC licensing team for processing many of those licenses within a 4-month period. Excuse me.
What type of outreach was done to mitigate any negative impacts of the opening and quick closing of the application process?
Yeah. So as part of the litigation, we were required to close it in a 96-hour period, right? About 4 weeks before throughout that we opened the licenses, only about 2,500 applications were applied for. And then overnight, there was about 7,500 applications. And so we had a period where the judge recognized that it was Veterans Day to ensure that not only the public would know about the closure, we communicated that to the communities, and then the industry itself communicated to itself about that closure. And we saw a rush of 7,500 applications in the 96-hour period before we had to close it on that Monday at 9 a.m.
And did the influx of additional EV for hire vehicles result in pressure on the utilization rate that might have led to the lockouts?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And in short, no. Many of the drivers were already driving. They were in leasing arrangements, right? And so they moved from having to lease upwards of $425, upwards to $900 a week, to now owning their own vehicle and being able to own their own business and drive in New York City.
And going forward, how do we manage the driver ecosystem to balance the interests of new drivers or add EVs and wheelchair accessible vehicles while also reducing empty cars on our streets and supporting driver pay?
Yeah. So one of the main issues that I think we need to reflect on was that Uber and Lyft were onboarding thousands of drivers as of late last year and even early this year, right? Despite not having enough trips out there. And so what we're doing is we're looking at ways to limit onboarding of new drivers and ensuring that our existing drivers have enough jobs before we allow for Uber and Lyft to onboard new drivers. Again, like I said, it's a deliberative process. We're looking at many ways that would assist us with this, but it is crucial that we take a lot of time to think about how it would impact the overall infrastructure of driver pay and the industry.
Where my concern mostly lies or has lied is with the lockouts and the reasons behind the lockouts, especially in light of the fair wage that the TLC has tried to put in place, and then now seeing and hearing from drivers about these lockouts and how it's impacting them. So, can we talk a little bit about the lockouts? What causes? Because I know deactivation lockout has two different reasons, but just wanting to understand more the scope of the lockout dynamic with Uber.
Yeah, and I appreciate it because I share those concerns. Since 2018, we have repeatedly warned that the intended consequence of the utilization rule was to control access for drivers to the platform. The study that the rule was based on is specific that drivers may be subject to limited access to the platform. We have seen 5 different TLC commissioners since 2018. The TLC has repeatedly tried to tweak the rule to try to limit the lockouts. If you don't know, the rule has been paused more than it's been in effect. For 3.5 years, the rule was not enforced. The TLC stopped enforcing the rules in January of 2020, not post-pandemic, but before the pandemic, in January of 2020, and then didn't start enforcing it again until last year. The rule is fundamentally flawed. There needs to be a minimum pay rule. There are dozens of jurisdictions that have implemented minimum pay rules that don't lean heavily on utilization. That doesn't mean utilization shouldn't be measured. That doesn't mean there can't be another rule that works with utilization. But the rule, what a former TLC commissioner told me is that lockouts are a feature, not a bug of the rule. And lockouts are horrible. Lockouts are horrible. The rule is a bad rule. The TLC needs to revisit it, and the TLC doesn't revisit it. They implemented it because the council gave them the authority to do so in 2018. The council gave them the authority to do so after a report that was published by James Parrott and Michael Reich. And the rule that was proposed in that rule looks very, very different than the rule that exists today. For example, that rule is based on company-specific utilization. The rule that's active today is industry-wide utilization. So when one company's utilization rate drops below 45% and the other company's utilization rate is above 53 or 54%, the company with the higher rate still has to lock drivers out in order to make sure that the industry-wide utilization is above 53%. That was not the rule envisioned in 2018 when the council passed the law allowing the TLC to create the utilization rule. It's a totally different rule. The TLC has stepped way out of where the rule was in 2018 when this council granted them the right to create that rule.
Offline, I'd like to understand a little bit more granularly on that piece.
Question for you. How do lockouts actually relate to the pay rule, and what does the pay rule require?
Okay, thank you, council member. So what the point of the pay rule is to approximate what any other minimum wage law does. The point of it is to compensate drivers for all time that they are at work. And the rule does not contemplate lockouts. They were not contemplated when TLC passed the rule. They were not contemplated when Professors Parrott and Reich put their report together. The language of the rule says that you should be paid for all drivers, that utilization accounts for all time that drivers make themselves available to receive dispatches. It doesn't say that they're only paid for time logged on. So you take an example of a driver who they live in the Bronx, they go to Manhattan, they pick somebody up, they take them to the Eastern Queens, and they're locked out when they do the drop-off. They're still available at that point. They are trying to work, but they've been locked out for another hour or two or so. At that point, they are still available to receive dispatches. That time should be counted under the text of the rule, but it's not. So when Uber fails to provide the data that shows that time in which, under the rule's plain language, they are available to work, they are subverting the purpose of the rule. I know the gentleman from Uber had testified earlier that the initial report by Professors Parrott and Reich contemplated that companies could use lockouts. And that's just not true. I was actually speaking to Professor Parrott about this 2 weeks ago, and he said, no, it did not contemplate that. The report discussed the notion that companies more broadly would have to limit supply, but the idea of that would be to incentivize getting away from the oversaturation that had really wrecked the industry. That would be a question of hiring and attrition, not of randomly locking out drivers in the middle of their shifts and creating chaos for individual drivers and for the whole workforce.
Thank you.
Thank you.